On this issue, and indeed on the economy in general, Lucy Powell, who is the leader of the House of Commons, Labour Cabinet Minister, she's been talking about the economy and the inheritance from the Conservatives. I actually asked Kevin Hollingreck, the Shadow Housing Minister, about that. We did ask to speak to Lucy Powell, but she didn't have time this morning. She has spoken to Sky News, and this is what she said to Sky News.
Obviously, it's disappointing, these figures. You know, of course, we want to see these things happening faster. We want to see more growth in the economy, and we want to see that faster, but really so that it can be felt by ordinary people around the country. But this is a bit like turning around some huge oil tanker, and the underlying problems that the country faces, which are unprecedented and huge, which is why people voted for change, because they could see, quite honestly, going into that election, the country was going down the Swanee. We had living standards falling for the first time in our history going into that general election. We've had public services, particularly health and education, absolutely on their needs, in dire state of investment. And coming into government, we've had to really take some very difficult decisions. The inheritance and the public finances are even worse than we thought. We've had to take some difficult decisions.
If you don't mind...
But we are starting to turn that oil tanker around.
Well, that was Labour's Lucy Powell speaking to Sky News a little bit earlier today. We played that clip, in fact, to Kevin Hollingreck, who is the Shadow Housing Secretary. This is what he had to say about it.
The oil tanker was already turned around. What they've done is sunk the bloody thing. I mean, it's Christ almighty. I mean, our economy is the fastest growing economy in the world's, in the G7, which is the world's biggest economies. And that was the first 6 months of the year. Since when the Labour, all the gloom and doom, if you heard it again there from Lucy Powell, all the gloom and doom, and then massive tax increases and massive public spending, £70 billion of increase in public spending, £40 billion of which are tax increases.
Well, that was Kevin Hollingreck, who is the Shadow Housing Secretary, with some choice words there for Lucy Powell's thoughts on all of that. Well, let's get reaction from Elliot Keck. He's head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. What do you make of the broad economic picture, first of all, Elliot, and what Kevin Hollingreck and Lucy Powell were saying? Do you have more sympathy with one than the other, Elliot?
Listen, I think the economic picture is pretty dire. I certainly wouldn't particularly promote the economic performance of the United Kingdom over the last few years, where not only has GDP growth been sluggish, but GDP per capita growth, which is arguably a more important measure in terms of living standards, has been sluggish. But there's no doubt things are getting worse. You see inflation going up, business confidence going down, gilt yields going up, and also growth prospects slashed. So I think next year is looking like a pretty dire one for the United Kingdom, I'm afraid.
Elliot, I just wonder as well, in regard to this story on the front page of the Mail on Sunday, the Grinch, Reeves steals 45% of your donations, say charities. This is a bit of analysis totting up the national insurance contributions and so on how much charities will have to pay out of the donations we give them. A lot of people giving money to charities, if this story is true, will find themselves very shortchanged.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's it's a good time to be talking about this story. Obviously, at Christmas, charities become far more salient, given the very genuine concern that the public has that there are a lot of people that are not experiencing the Christmases that they deserve and that they need, and all the rest of it. So I think it's absolutely right that we're talking about charities at the moment and talking about the problems that they will face as a result of the national insurance hike. I think it's probably also the one part of the country, that one part of the economy that the Labour Party will have some sympathy with. Let's be honest, this Labour Party, this Labour government don't care about private sector. They see the private sector as nothing more than a cash cow to milk. So it's a good time to be talking about this story, but we have to remember that it's the whole of the private sector that is going to be suffering as a result of the national insurance rise.
Where do you think, as head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, the axe should fall? Because we know that there are some exemptions in regard to national insurance. What about GP surgeries, essentially private businesses giving services to the NHS? What about hospices, places like that? Should they have to pay these national insurance rises, or should they be exempted? What do you think?
Listen, my view is if you're going to increase national insurance, it needs to be increased across the board. And obviously my view and the TPA's view would be to not increase national insurance at all. But the problem is if you keep on creating these carve-outs, then you have this problem that you're exempting parts of the economy that, while are very important, they don't actually add to the economic growth and the economic potential. So, the parts of the economy that does drive economic growth, that does drive up living standards, that does pay most of the tax revenue, i.e. the private sector, is the only one that is being expected to pay this tax rise. And I think it's absolutely disgraceful that the public sector has a carve out from this NI rise. It shows that it's very much one rule for them and another rule for everybody else.
Elliot, thank you very much. That's Elliot Keck there. He's head of campaigns for the Taxpayers Alliance.